welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. My name is Nick Palavito. I'll be your moderator for today. And today we're going to discuss a very important topic. If you haven't seen it already, it's called BRICS. Now, first of all, for those who don't know what BRICS is, it is actually Brazil, which is the beginning of BRICS, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And what is their objective? Well, it looks to me to basically undermine the US economy. I mean, seriously, replace the dollar with whatever currency that they have and do any form of nefarious means to undermine the US position in the world. Okay, so BRICS has been around for a long time, but here's what happened recently, like last month. They added more recruits. They added Egypt, Ethiopia, they added the United Arab Emirates, and of course, Iran. In other words, all the usual suspects that are coming into this thing called BRICS as they achieve more allies. Argentina declined to get involved, and so did Saudi Arabia. So with that, we're going to bring in the Honorable David M. Walker, because it seems to me the U.S. had no response to BRICS, and see what his response is. So David, I'm sure you've been following it. As a matter of fact, you kind of introduced me to this whole BRICS concept. And the more I look at it, the more I see is we fund a lot of money, $65 billion in foreign aid, and a lot of it goes to our enemies. In other words, it's like clueless. And then when this happened, they decide we're going to expand. It's like, in football, when they expand the SEC and the Big Ten and there's no response. When there's like Afghanistan, when Russia invaded Crimea, there was no response. And now BRICS is expanding, and it looks to me, this administration, there was no response in the media. So here we have an organization whose objective appears to be to undermine America. It's growing like a cancer, and there's no response. So curious to see what your response is.
Well, first, Happy New Year, Nick, and to everybody else who's on here. You'll see that I'm wearing my Notre Dame sweatshirt because they're now my team in the NCAA football playoffs. Being a practicing Roman Catholic, you got to go with the home team when the other teams have been eliminated. First, let's talk briefly about BRICS, and then I want to compare it to the alliance that I talk about in America in 2040, which is very different. You properly pointed out that BRICS stands for the initial members of this coalition, or however you want to refer to them, which are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Since then, it's expanded significantly, and there are many other countries who have expressed an interest but have not joined yet. In fact, if you look at the countries that have expressed interest, along with the ones that have already joined, it is a majority of the population on Earth. It is a majority of the landmass on Earth, and the total GDP of the combined, both ones that are members and ones that have expressed interest, exceeds the G7. Today, the GDP in nominal dollars of BRICS exceeds the United States. Does not exceed the G7, but it does exceed the United States. But again, that's on nominal dollars. When you adjust it for purchasing power parity, you get a very different answer. And that's what a lot of people don't do. They don't think about the fact that, you can buy a lot more in some of these other countries than you can in the United States for the same equivalent currency, for lots of reasons. The cost of labor, the incremental cost of regulatory actions and things of that nature, the incremental cost of healthcare and a variety of issues, if you will. From my standpoint, BRICS is primarily an economic alliance. It's an economic alliance to provide an alternative to the United States primarily. The United States has not taken it seriously enough. There's no question about that. As I've talked about many times, the United States does not have a strategic plan. dealing with economic, diplomatic, national security, and domestic issues. Does not have one. Measures success based upon how much money it throws at an issue, not based upon the outcomes that it achieves with the resources and other actions that it commits to a particular issue. But let's compare, BRICS real quickly to the alliance that I talked about in American 2040. In American 2040, I talked about the alliance of China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and a few other countries. And you'll notice there's a lot of overlap there. That alliance is different. That alliance is against U.S. and Western interest as it relates to economic issues, diplomatic issues, national security issues, and cultural issues. We haven't taken that seriously enough. China is the lead of that alliance. China is our biggest competitor. It's a near peer adversary. It's with regard to from a national security standpoint, they have a plan. They execute on the plan, and if you look at the impact, you'll see there's a lot of correlation between China's Belt and Road Initiative, which deals with all those dimensions, and countries that are interested in belonging to BRICS, and a lot of those countries are a majority of the African continent. A majority of the South American continent, even some in Central America and the Caribbean. And by the way, a vast majority of Asia, with the notable exception of Japan, Australia, and New Zealand and the Philippines. But so I think we have to take it seriously. One of the things that they've really focused on is to try to create an alternative currency that would be backed by 40% by gold. Our currency is backed by nothing other than the full faith and credit of the United States government. And a balance would be a basket of reserve currencies. And coming back to where we started, this is something the United States and other Western nations have not taken seriously enough, and that needs to change.
Okay, and what we'll do is we'll bring our panel in and see what their thoughts are. But the way I see it is that this is expanding. They added Egypt, they added Ethiopia, they added the United Arab Emirates, they added Iran. And many of these countries, U.S. foreign aid, millions and millions of dollars goes to. And we got to stop this. In other words, if they're going to join an alliance whose purpose is to undermine the United States, don't send them any money, but we're going to look at our people around the world and see what they have to say. We're going to bring in Rick Grosner, our high IQ guy from Los Angeles, as one of our panelists. We also have Sasha Starr from Canada, have Dr. Sharif from, he's from Bangladesh, and of course we have Kim, who's from the United States, and it looks like we have Rick Grosner, who's up first.
So how can we undercut BRICS? We used to do diplomacy by throwing money. We were the world's buddy. We would, and we still kind of are. We have 800 military bases throughout the world, and those bases feed money into the countries they're in. We give out a ton in foreign aid. So is that a way to undercut it by just being more friendly with our dollars, or what do we do? Also, gold, there's only $12 trillion worth of gold in the entire world. You can't back, and the net worth of the whole world is like 500, is 40 times that.
We give out about 65 billion a year in foreign aid. Not all these countries receive it, and they don't receive a lot, oddly enough. They receive millions of dollars or billions of dollars, and that's about it. But at the same time, they should get zero. In other words, send a message to these other countries. If you don't join BRICS, you're obviously not an ally of the United States, or not interested enough. So zero them out.
Well, first, if you went back to the gold standard, which I don't think is feasible, quite frankly, it wouldn't be on a 1-to-1 ratio. It wouldn't be a dollar is equal to an ounce of gold. Right? That wouldn't be the case, because gold now is worth about $2,600 an ounce. So it would be a ratio, but I still don't think that's feasible at this point in time. Secondly, we used to be over 50% of global GDP, and the dollar used to be as good as gold. And but that's not where we are now. We're now about a quarter of the world's GDP and declining. The dollar's not as good as gold. We used to have our finances in order, where we weren't running huge deficits every year, where our debt to GDP was at a reasonable and sustainable level. That's not the case anymore. We used to be very free at throwing money at things, as we still are domestically. Whether the issues work or not, and as Nick talked about, we throw a lot of foreign aid out there without necessarily thinking through who we're giving it to and what we expect to achieve through that foreign aid. At the same point in time, if you eliminated every dime of foreign aid, it wouldn't come close to making a dent in our financial challenges. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't review and reconsider what we're doing and how we measure success. We clearly should do that. All right. If you look at the Belt and Road Initiative by China, as I said, it's economic, it's diplomatic, it's military, and it's cultural. And yeah, it involves money, but we don't even have a plan, and plus we don't have the kind of money that we used to have. And if anything, we need to rationalize and reduce the number of bases that we have overseas, including here in the United States, rather than increase it.
So is Belt and Road in China, is that the idea that you build a huge highway infrastructure in China to get people off the farms and into the cities where they contribute to productivity?
No, the Belt and Road Initiative is a major part of their long-term strategic plan. It's designed to create routes and connections from China to Western Europe. But in addition to that, it's designed to try to help nations deal with their own infrastructure. It's also designed to try to be able to create, bases, including naval bases in different parts of the world. In many cases, the Belt and Road Initiative is focused on countries that have significant strategic advantages from a military standpoint, and or countries that have natural resources that are extremely valuable and desirable. And many times what China will do is that they will, provide funding, sometimes in the form of a loan, to be able to build infrastructure. That infrastructure in many cases is built by Chinese rather than local native citizens. And if it goes well, then fine. But if it doesn't go well, then China typically takes ownership of the property and facilities associated therewith. So, it's the Belt and Road Initiative is primarily outside of China, not inside of China.
So, but it sounds like they're doing what we used to do, which is throw money at other countries. Are they just stealing our thunder?
Well, there's a difference. They're doing it strategically. They're looking at what are strategic locations, what are strategic resources, whether they be rare earth minerals or whether they be, other materials, if you will. And so they target their aid that has a strategic purpose, either military and or economic. Just as China right now is buying up a lot of land, a lot of farmland in the United States. Just so happens a lot of that farmland in many cases is close to military bases. These people are smart people. They plan. They execute a plan. We have smart people too.
But why? So should we be doing the same thing?
We should be doing something similar, but not necessarily on the same scale. All right.
We cannot buy real estate in China, Rick.
Yeah, no,
So
you're
we
not
can buy it in Zimbabwe or someplace where they have lots of rare earth minerals.
Sure.
Yeah, well, that's different. Yeah, that's more from an economic standpoint. Okay, but there are national security implications. For example, we rely on China way too much for rare earth minerals and other materials that are important for technology, that are important for national security, and that are important for health. And we need to reduce that reliance. But to do that, you got to have a plan that you execute. We don't have that. As I've said many times before, if you don't have a plan, all you have is prayer. Don't get me wrong. I'm for prayer, but I'm for prayer and a plan.
We have a country just north of us, Canada, huge expanse of land, must have a ton of exploitable natural resources, including rare earth minerals. Shouldn't we be like just throwing money into Canada to develop that?
Well, their prime minister is probably resigning this afternoon.
Yeah, and a more right wingy guy is going to come in next time they
who
have an
knows?
election.
But, if Trump had his way, he'd probably want to buy part of it or whatever. But at a minimum, we ought to be able to have, as part of that plan, we ought to have more active efforts to partner with allies, and Canada is clearly an ally. Okay, to be able to engage in arrangements that are mutually beneficial, that are beneficial to them from an economic standpoint, that are beneficial for us, as well as from a national security standpoint. And Canada is an example of a country that does have a lot of valuable minerals and other materials that we could actively cooperate with. There are other countries in other parts of the world that we could do the same. Australia is one. There are some in Southeast Asia, Africa. But again, you have to have a plan. It's got to be targeted, and it's got to be an all hands on deck initiative, because we are lagging in this area.
Well, we do have a representative.
I have a question to you based on your presentation. It seems to me that BRICS is kind of an amorphous coalition of very different countries geographically, from sociological point of view, the religion, the nationalities. It's just really it's not coherent, and they're not even voicing the idea of to dethrone America economy and foremost American dollar. It's not even being formulated. Maybe the only countries that ever said something to that effect was Russia, because countries like China, Brazil, they're much more careful. Even if they think it would not be a bad idea to get rid of US dollar, but at least they're not pronouncing it openly. Now, from real thing, what you presented is only one country, is China, with the Silk Road initiatives. They have obviously experience, capacity, willingness, and plan to proceed in that what they are doing. No other country even closely supports or monitors what China does. So in this case, it's very difficult to see the BRICS and China, which is part of BRICS, on the same level of action required from the United States. And especially now, when the government, when the running of U.S. government is being taken over by Committee 20, the technocrats headed by Elon Musk, and in next few years, you will have very little say. Trump probably is going to play golf starting January 21st, and so Musk and company, they will be effectively running all United States of America. How they are going to try to deal with China, I'm not so much worried about BRICS, but China, I'm not sure.
Well, first, several things. One, you're correct that Russia has been more boisterous on this issue, but that's nothing new. You know that. I used to live in Ukraine, right? I mean, they're big. They're not always able to back their words with concrete actions, as they found out in Ukraine. Okay, to the detriment of Ukrainian population as well as the Russian population. Secondly, you are correct that China is the 800-pound gorilla, whatever number you want to put on it. They are the one driving the train. They're the ones you need to be concerned about. Thirdly, I think there's no way the United States dollar is going to lose reserve currency status. The real question is, what's our market share going to be? Okay. In other words, is there a viable alternative where the dollar is no longer 60% of global trade transactions?
Would that be crypto?
You know, not in the near term. Over time, who knows? But not in the near term. And so the real question is that what's it going to do to our market share? If our market share goes down, then that's going to have a negative effect on our cost of capital. It means we're going to have to pay more to borrow. It's going to have a negative effect on our trade advantages. And thirdly, it's going to have a negative effect on our ability to impose economic sanctions on bad actors. Those aren't good things. I don't think we're going to lose reserve currency status, but I think if we don't change course and if we don't end up getting serious and start creating a plan and executing on it, we will lose market share, and that will have an adverse effect on our collective future.
Jacoby, you have a comment?
I completely agree about having a plan, because that's something that we always struggle with in the first place, is actually creating a coherent plan that would work. My big thing is, do we have the political will to push through that plan if we even create a legitimate plan that could help us moving forward? So, Dave, I would love your insight on that. How do we create a coherent plan, then be able to get people on board with that coherent plan?
Well, first, part of the plan is you have to define what's the proper role for the federal government, what it should be doing. All right. And that's a lot of ground that has to be tilled. Secondly, what are you trying to accomplish? And how do you measure success in outcome-based terms? And let me come back to the 4 dimensions I talked about: economic security, diplomatic, influence, national security, and domestic tranquility, which includes not just it includes the health and welfare of our citizens as well as crime and things of that nature. So what are we trying to achieve? How do we measure success? What's the proper role of the federal government? There's something called the Government Performance and Results Act, as defined, and it requires every major federal agency to have a strategic plan and to update it every 3 to 5 years. There also was an amendment to that legislation which requires the federal government to have a consolidated plan along the lines of what I'm talking about. Okay, but it's never done it. It's never done it. It should be done by the Office of Management and Budget in coordination with the Congress, and it needs to focus on, as I said, what the government should do, how it should measure success, and how are we doing based on plan? Are we getting better or worse? How do we compare to our competitor or comparator groups? I will tell you one of the things that I found, Jacoby, which is very frustrating. Government is dominated by people who have myopia. They're nearsighted. They're not farsighted. Okay. Secondly, government is dominated by people who measure success by how many people do I have responsibility for, how much budget, and how much do I spend, and how many regulations do I issue, rather than what am I trying to accomplish, and have I made a difference for the American people or for the country based upon the resources and authorities that I have. The other frustration I find in government is many people will say that they're for transparency and accountability until it relates to them. And a lot of people, one of the things I've been pushing for many years is not just a plan, but key national indicators, key outcome-based indicators that say, how do we measure success? All right. And are we getting better or worse? How do we compare to others? And a lot of times politicians don't want that. You know why they don't want that? Because they don't want to be held accountable. And because in many cases, we're spending huge amounts of money and aren't making progress. And I'll give you one example that's, a little tough to hear. We've spent huge amounts of money to try to fight poverty. And with the exception of Social Security and Medicare, which clearly have had a very positive effect on seniors, our poverty level has gotten worse for non-seniors since we created all these programs. It's actually worse. Rick?
All right, three things. If you want to fight poverty, just buy kids in school lunch and breakfast. Costs less than $5 a day per kid. Cheap way to make sure our kids, are healthy enough to learn. All right, thing two, China's cozying up to Africa. Africa is where we want to be. Africa right now has the same population as Europe. By 2050, Africa will have twice as many people in Europe, 2.5 billion people. Africa is where AI is happening because AI needs to be trained by humans coding things in. Africa is where you can hire thousands of humans for $1 an hour to train AI. Africa, huge mineral resources. So be Africa's friend.
Here, I don't know if you can see this. This is a map. The dark blue are the countries that are already members of BRICS. Okay, the light are the ones that are interested in BRICS. And you look at the African continent there.
It's not lit up at all.
Yeah, it's not. Well, no, it's got a lot of prospective members. All right, and then look at South.
Oh, okay, I see. All right, sorry, I couldn't see it.
Look at Africa and South America. Okay.
David, share that map with me so that we can use that.
All right, so we need to go after those countries to strengthen our economic ties because that's where the resources are, both human and mineral.
We've allowed China to do way too much in our country. We've allowed them way too much access.
There's also
they
another
own everything.
One more thing. There's a country we need to focus on, which is the country of tech bro billionaires. The top 10, 11 tech billionaires are all in America, and they have a combined net worth the same as Saudi Arabia. If they were a nation, they'd be the 24th richest nation in the world. And they kind of, they've infiltrated our government, and they're rich and powerful, and they'll help determine, whether the U.S. succeeds or fails.
Just a quick thing, because I don't want to leave off the poverty thing, because I think the poverty thing is a very important piece. And this is where I would love to hear Dave's opinion on the idea that because Doge has a lot of downfalls, a good thing that it could do, instead of having billionaires in there, quote unquote, volunteering their time, which a lot of them are going to end up using it to push their own agendas and actually get themselves more enriched. What would be nice is if we had that same type of setup for those individuals that were affected by these policies. So in terms of talking about poverty, how a lot of some of the poverty policies don't really help out those that are impoverished that they're saying they're supposed to help. It would be nice to have some individuals in a Doge format to be able to, hey, these individuals that are being affected, these poverty level individuals, can actually give you glimpses into their lives of how this policy or that policy could actually help them a little bit more. But in terms of the AI that Rick is talking about, the big platform for AI is energy. And that is honestly where AI is. Energy and water. Those are the two biggest things that we have to overcome to actually push AI on a tremendous level that it needs to go to, that people are actually looking for. Hence the reason why Microsoft, Google, all the big tech players are buying into nuclear power plants. Right now, Virginia is opening up its first ever, or the U.S. first ever nuclear fusion plant, and not the opposite way. the nuclear fusion plant that is supposed to take place to come on board and push out clean energy more so than having what is currently our nuclear power plants actually have right now. There's that technology that honestly Canada is actually at the forefront of. But yes, in terms of BRICS, if we're going to look at AI, the only way to control AI truthfully, if we control the actual energy, and actually, I hate that we're going down the water world way, but the water supply, because to contain that energy and handle all that technology and to keep that cooling, we're going to figure out a way to deal with the water resource that we have. That we have a limited supply of water on this planet.
So, but to off of Jacoby, the deal is we have very intelligent machines. Our brains, they run on sandwiches, right? But AI, to do the same amount of thought, requires a bunch of servers in a big ass room that eats a ton of energy, gets super hot, needs to be cooled. So yeah, you're going to and the more powerful the thinking done by AI, the bigger the room, the more servers. You're going to need to find places where you can safely put nuclear reactors. Greenland, northern Canada, where it doesn't matter if you have a meltdown in Irkutsk or it matters, but it's better than having it in Chicago. So yeah, big server farms, big reactors, a lot of water. You've got a lot of water and ice in the Arctic Circle. So I assume we're going to be building big AI installations, in inhospitable places.
Let's go to Asia, the Asian subcontinent. Let's go to Dr. Sharif. He's in Bangladesh. Yeah. He's wedged between India and China, two of the biggest BRICS country in the world. How does it feel to be surrounded by BRICS, Dr. Sharif?
Okay. First thing first, I want to clarify a few things, because if you want to understand BRICS, you have to understand the global south properly. And the concept of Belt and Road Initiative actually comes from Silk Road 1.0 concept, right? The Silk Road in between Europe and China, India, Persian, Arabia, and Egypt. This area, long time before, few hundred years before, there is a connection for global trade and everything. And if you want to understand the global south, you have to understand three things. Number one, our culture. So naturally, example, the Bangladesh, India, or Chinese people, we want to focus on our history. So this Belt and Road Initiative come from these historical issues. It's a trade and commerce and everything. So China exactly understand these things properly. That's why they heavily invest on Silk Route 2.0, right? This Belt and Road Initiative, what you are discussing right now. And if you see that we have a Indian Ocean, Java, Mediterranean seas, and these area we are heavily utilizing for Belt and Road Initiative. Secondly, if you see the economic issues, sovereign wealth fund is the most important factor for economic growth. I'm sorry to say, USA have a lot of financial burdens, loans, and all of the things. On the other hand, China has own sovereign fund, huge trillions of dollars, and they utilizing it for Belt and Road Initiative. So if you see these BRICS factors, then you find out the solutions. There are 4 factors according to my understanding. Definitely, they want to go for de-dollarizations. Definitely, I think this is the missing point for today's discussion. They are focusing on global South leadership, because Western world, most of the way, they do not understand the leadership activities of the global South. Number 3, they are expanding the memberships, and right now, China and India has 25% of the global populations. Number 4, what we are seeing right now in US economy, let's say Trump come to the politics, right? In few days, he will be the president of USA. But climate change and sustainability is the most important factor for global South, right? Bangladesh, heavily affected by the climate change, right? India, heavily affected by the climate change. Example, Maldives, heavily affected by the climate change. What we are discussing Silk Road 1.0, or what you are discussing Silk Road 2.0, or this Belt and Road Initiative. So who will take the leaderships? This is the missing point of US people based on cultures, understanding the global south, understanding the economy and everything. Trump say, I do not care about climate change. I do not care about the these and that lot of burdens. Maybe he is right and he is good for USA, but you are losing the popularity in global south and around 40-50% population in the global south. Now UN also give the responsibility to China because of three things. Number one, populations. Number two, the climate change, the green solutions. And number three is that they understand the beauty of Silk Road 1.0. They go for Belt and Road Initiative. It's understanding culture. It's not only the whole of the wire and everything. And final things from my World Talent Economic Forum, I am designing the new concept, what I call Silk Road 3.0. USA can take the leads. How? You have to understand cultures. I sent you several times the email. The understanding the Islamic finance, the beauty of grassroots level people in global south, understanding the climate finance, and solve all of the complex problem with global trade, global commerce, and cultural interactions. And we are also taking action. We are developing the leadership programs with Stanford universities, with global south and with global north. But things is that we need more support and everything. But again, this all about understanding the global south. This is missing point of the Western world, but I think we can fix it. Thanks. Thank you.
Let me jump in if I can. First, thank you. That was very interesting, Doctor. Appreciate your thoughts on that. And I agree that the United States needs to do a much better job with regard to culture. For the interest of full and fair disclosure, Bangladesh is one of the countries that has expressed potential interest in joining BRICS, but it has not joined it yet. And the other thing is let's talk about climate for a second. Clearly, climate is a major issue from a sustainability standpoint. There's no question that mankind plays some role with regard to climate change. It's real, okay? It's also true that while the United States can and should do more in that area, it cannot solve the problem. The clean air and clean water and air temperatures do not respect geopolitical boundaries. And that unless there is global cooperation, including from some of these BRICS countries, in particular China, with regard to dealing with some of the types of emissions and other issues that have to be dealt with, we're not going to solve the problem. So, yeah, we need to take it seriously. We need to do more. But I would respectfully suggest that we're probably doing more than many other countries. And other countries need to step up more, in particular China. Secondly, we also have to be realistic with regard to the goals that we set for ourselves. I mean, they have to be realistic. They have to be attainable. We have to have a more realistic transition plan from traditional fossil fuel-based energy sources to alternative energy sources. Clearly, we need to move there, but we need to move there within a period of time that's realistic and that the American people will support. Let me come back to a couple other things that were said. DOGE needs to first be defined as to what its scope is. It's going to have an executive order. That can't come until Trump is in office. It's going to have a charter. From my standpoint, it's a modern day Grace Commission from the Reagan administration on steroids. Okay. It's going to focus primarily on the organization and operations of government. There's two levels of that. There's tactical, looking for things that that don't make sense right now, that are kind of targeted where we're spending money, where we shouldn't be spending money. And then there's strategic, or transformational, which is, well, what are we trying to do? And how do we measure success? And how do we need to change government, in a way that's focused on true needs rather than unlimited wants, and that we're actually getting something done for the resources and authorities that we're given. So, and I'm frankly very disappointed that it's not well organized. I mean, you know, you've got Elon Musk and you've got Vivek Ramaswamy, two very bright people, no question about it. Are there transferable things from the private sector to the public sector? Absolutely. But the government is tremendously different than the private sector. And the degree of difficulty in trying to make meaningful and sustainable change in the government is much more difficult than it is in the private sector. And yet I don't see anybody who has any real transformational experience in the public sector and also private sector experience who's involved in the initiative. And then that needs to be dealt with sooner rather than later. You know, with regard to energy, you're exactly right that energy is a major constraint with regard to how far and fast we can go on AI, as well as the human capital dimension that Rick mentioned as well. And you're also correct in saying that water is by far the most valuable resource on Earth. It is the source of life. It is much more important than oil or anything else that's on this Earth. Okay, and it's also arguably the thing that's most likely to cause conflict in the future. And even the United States has water problems. They used to be primarily in the West, but now they're moving east. And the issue with regard to the need for more energy and cooling capability, you know, for alternative sources of energy, in particular nuclear, which can be done very safely now, you know, is going to be real. It's a real constraint. Maybe that's why Trump is interested in, you know, in doing something with Greenland and Canada. You know, who knows? But we'll see. All right, Rick, you got your hand up. Buddy.
Yeah, we're the U.S. and other Western countries are doing a couple things that help with climate change. One is we're being entertained too much with streaming TV, with social media. We're tapping on our phones instead of having sex and making babies. Our population, we don't have replacement reproduction, and that helps with climate change. The fewer people, the less climate change. Also, carbon footprint per capita in the US is dropping at 1% per year. In the 70s, we drove cars that got 11 miles per gallon. Our stuff is getting more efficient. So in 2008, 20 tons per capita per person in the US. Now it's down to 14 tons per capita. You know, that's a 30% drop. So those are some good signs, except that we're not making enough babies, which is kind of a not great thing.
Yeah, we don't have a declining population. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'll come like you, Ken. We would have a declining population, but for immigration. All right, Kim?
Sure. No, I agree with you, David. The declining population is because we've left the spoiled, rotten, wealthy men in office, left nothing with the policies to give a future for their children today. And they don't want to have children. So we got to change the policies. You know, they gave themselves PPP loans they didn't have to pay back, yet they complain about the student loans. So you got to fix that if you want to fix the population and have Americans have baby Americans. Two, I want to bring up about Doge and, you know, how everyone's having these high expectations of these two very smart, intelligent, wealthy men who should know how to fix all of our spending problems. And Quibi is a good example, and Nick would back me up on this, that when you give very wealthy, rich people who know nothing but how to spend money, all this attention and money and authority and more money to fix problems, all they're going to do is spend more money. So I think what you should have done was put somebody in there like a housewife who knows how to budget, because putting rich, wealthy people in that position, and Nick, you can back me up on this. Quibi blew billions and billions of dollars to build a company because it was a bunch of wealthy people who knew nothing about budgeting money. Now, FinCEN needs to be cut. That is the most dumbest organization I have seen in our country. You know, they have good ideas or intentions, but to sit there and make just small businesses conform to registration rules for federal when we could easily report all of the information they want into our state registration for our corporations? But they're not requiring religion. They're not requiring nonprofits nor big organizations to do the same filings. And they say this is to help prevent and monitor the way people spend money and filter it to other countries. But it's not just the small companies. And FYI, that explains why so many people in other countries have been asking me, hey, how do I get a nonprofit in your country? And you know why? Because they don't have to report the information on it. Now, they could save a lot of money by saying, hey, when you re-register every year with your company, just add this information to it and then connect the databases, which is going to lead me to one more problem that we have. Our databases aren't united. And that's the reason why we are spending billions, if not trillions of dollars, writing checks to dead people, and they are cashing them. And for some reason, the social services database is showing, about 60 million people living past 120, which they're not. So I think what we need to do is get smarter with the technology that we're using, unite all of the databases, and get rid of some of these stupid organizations like Doge. Because I don't.
David, how do you make government more tech savvy? Like you look at Chuck Grassley, who's 89 years old. That guy doesn't understand tech. How do you get those people to be tech literate?
First, you should have 12-year term limits, but that's a different.
Thank you.
Look, clearly one of the biggest problems the government has, both within departments as well as government-wide, is thousands of non-integrated legacy information systems that don't communicate with each other. The Defense Department by itself has well over 1,000, okay? And one of the issues that Kim talked about was, the Social Security Administration maintains the death registry, all right? So to the extent that you're paying, giving aid or paying benefits or whatever else to somebody who's dead, it's because there's not enough communication going on between the Social Security Administration and those other agencies. I just read within the last few days that the oldest person on earth is supposed to be 117 years old, which tells me anybody who's over 120 is probably dead.
Yeah, we just talked about that on the news and everything. Hey, so just really quickly, along those same lines, that's what I was going to ask earlier. Because my problem with Doge is kind of what Sasha was alluding to earlier, which is that a lot of the wealthy people are the ones that are running it and everything like that. Because Elon Musk, I think, has gotten up to $300 million or $1 billion, and there are a number of others in that space as well. So what can we do even within Doge to try to make sure that we are addressing the wealth inequality? Because the middle class is pretty much almost non-existent. So you're either very much in the poverty camp or you're in the super rich camp, and all along those lines. So your thoughts around that, David, because that seems to me to be one of the things that they need to be addressing is the economics of what's going on. Because right now we're about to become a two-class society, either the wealthy or the poor, because the middle class is significantly shrinking. I know there is a middle class, but it's significantly shrinking.
Well, part of the question is, how do you define what the middle class is? But no, however you define what the middle class is, it's getting squeezed, and it is shrinking. And a larger and larger percentage of income and wealth is going to the top 1%, 5%, et cetera. No question about it. Okay. From a poverty standpoint, the lowest poverty rate is for senior citizens. And that's largely due to Social Security and Medicare, which are the importance of those programs. The highest poverty rate in the United States is children. And who represent our future? Children, okay? And as Kim said, we don't have an adequate birth rate. Same thing with regard to Rick. It's 1.62. It takes 2.1 to be able to maintain your population. And a lot of that is because of costs, whether it be housing, whether it be childcare, be education, and a lot of that is because people are not, too many people aren't optimistic about the future. I mean, if you look during the election, 70% of voters felt that the country was headed in the wrong direction, and were concerned that our future may not be as good as our past. Well, that's obviously not an incentive to have more kids, okay? And so there's a number of things we have to deal with. Look, I think we have to be realistic as to how much Doge can do within the amount of time that it's going to exist. It's going to exist a year and a half, okay? And so therefore, I think there are things that it can do dealing with the organization and operations of government that if it executes it the right way, it could save several $100 billion a year. But we're in a $2 trillion hole every year and getting bigger over time. So there's more work that's going to need to be done. They can help make a down payment, but let's come back to something we started this conversation with. We have no plan. We haven't really defined what the federal government ought to be doing versus other levels of government versus the private sector versus the not-for-profit sector. We haven't defined what are we trying to achieve and how do we measure success on an outcome basis. We haven't. That is fundamental. Doge is not going to do that. That's a much bigger effort that needs to be led by OMB, but they can provide some insights and some momentum to be able to get that done, because we're about 248 years late, on that, but better late than never, I guess, right?
Only 240.
Do we need a campaign from somewhere to make
Oh my
people
God.
optimistic enough to have kids? Because things are pretty good. There's a lot of ominous stuff on the horizon, but in the meantime, things are great. You can get an 85-inch TV at Walmart for $450. If you
Because it's made in China.
me at 85, that's 7 feet wide.
That's called a want rather than a need, Rick.
Right. Let's hear from our friend in Canada, Sasha Stark.
Sasha.
Okay, a couple of things. Trump made a lot of promises which helped him greatly to win the election. Now, he's done his part of the job. Now, starting 21st, he can play golf. And all the work is now on the shoulders of Musk and Vivek, what is his name?
Ramaswamy.
I thought it was Thomas Sutra, I think it was closer. And then a few other part of whoever is part of the committee of 20. So they are going to do all the fixing. Are you serious? Come on, this is a play. This is election promises to win the election. So for next 2 or maybe even 4 years, there will be no government investigation of Vivek and Musk and all others. This committee of 20 people, they bought themselves 4 years, most likely to stay away from it. And that's all what they're going to do, to deal with thwarting all the investigations and all the threats against their empire. Because if you think about it, Musk never invented anything. He was in a good business position to acquire one thing, sign government contract with another thing, and so on. And if it will be all laid down and investigated, so he will be left with very little, if anything.
Well, we'll see, Sasha. Let me ask you a quick question, then we'll go to Jacoby. Who's your next prime minister going to be?
Olivria. He will be next. He's the leader of a progressive conservative party. He will win majority most likely. And he's very capable person, at least from what I heard from him. And
thank you for that.
Makes me very optimistic.
Toby.
I think the major concern, I guess, around Doge, and this is actually the honest concern, which kind of encompasses what everybody is saying. What is the difference between an oligarchy and Doge at this moment? There's nothing, because you have Elon Musk who's in there. Elon Musk has a ton of government contracts, and one of the big reasons why he's on board with it is because, for example, the self-driving cars, he's having a lot of issues with getting his self-driving cars on the road, which honestly, the self-driving cars that he has have the highest accident rate. but he wants to get by some red tape to be able to allow those self-driving cars. That's one of the reasons why he bought into Twitter, was because he was having some government issues with that because of some of the comments that he made on Twitter. Then he ends up buying Twitter, and now he can say whatever he wants to, even though he says he's freedom of speech. He's still blocking people who are commenting against him. So with Doge right now, the two individuals that are running it have a substantial amount of money they are going to gain. They also have the direct line to the individual that they paid money to, or definitely Elon Musk. For example, he had a comment about there was all the mass deportation. We're going to get everybody out. Elon Musk says, hey, we want H-1B visas. And then Trump changes his tune to, hey, we're going to do H-1B visas. So we know that there is an influence there. And at this moment, because there is no background check for anybody who's going to help out Doge, and all of his billionaires are going to be there. This is why I tried to suggest earlier about individuals that are not going to benefit from the government to be able to suggest things, and that could be a way. But there's no background checks on anybody on Doge or anything. So what is the difference between Doge and an oligarch?
Well, okay, there's the difference. All right, first, we don't have definition yet as to the mission, scope of authority that Doge will have. What we do know is certain things. It's not in the government. It is an outside advisory group, okay? We know that it doesn't have the power to implement anything. We know that what it should do is it should draw upon the good work of the GAO, of the Inspectors General, of OMB, of the Joint Committee on Taxation, of the Congressional Budget Office, and others for ideas about economy and efficiency. You know, the Defense Business Board that I'm on, and many other things for ideas on economy efficiency. We know that all it has the power to do is to make recommendations. Those recommendations need to be put into three buckets: what theoretically could be done by the president through an executive order, what would require legislation and therefore buy-in by the Congress, and thirdly, what, if anything, might require a constitutional amendment, if you will, which is a whole different process. So, you know, there are checks and balances, because checks and balances are, all they can do is make recommendations. Now, my personal view is, there are some potential for conflicts. There's no question about that. And I think that, you know, any recommendations that would be made that would present a real or appearance of a conflict of interest are likely to be given a hell of a lot more scrutiny and are subject to a lot more questions or whatever else than others that wouldn't. But it's too early. We really don't know. I mean, and that's one of the frustrating things. In the absence of knowing, you don't know what we're going to get.
But I think that's where my concern comes in. Is that it sounds the same.
So I thank the Honorable David Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States, and also our panelists around the world. And stay tuned for Doge, because it'll be coming up later on next week on economics. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Take care.
All right.